Hello, and welcome to Spilling the Tea, the podcast where we dive deep into the cutting edge of confidential computing and AI. I'm Lisa Lau from Secret Network, and I'll be one of your co hosts today. I want to tell you this isn't your typical podcast. Here, we explore the real tech shaping the wave of Web3, from zero knowledge proofs and trusted execution environments to the frontier of privacy preserving machine learning. Today's guest brings serious firepower, but before we get into it, I'm joined by my brilliant co-host, blockchain strategist, AI thinker, and one of the sharpest voices in Web3, Zoe McFox from Vala Network. Zoe brings a unique blend of strategic insight and storytelling to the world of confidential computing and AI. At Vala, she's helping shape the decentralized infrastructure that powers trustless, privacy preserving applications. And she's always asking how we make these tools meaningful, accessible, and human. And now I'm proud to introduce to you our guest for today, Michael J. Casey. Michael is chairman of the Advanced AI Society, which is a nonprofit launched in 2024 to promote decentralized approaches to artificial intelligence. He is the former chief content officer of CoinDesk and previously spent 18 years at the Wall Street Journal as a senior columnist. Welcome, Michael. We're thrilled to have you. Michael Casey has written several books, including The Age of Cryptocurrency, The Truth Machine, and Our Biggest Fight: Reclaiming Liberty, Humanity, and Dignity in the Digital Age.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Lisa. Hi, Zoe. Thanks for having me.
Hello, Michael. Great to see you again. Super excited to be back online with you, Lisa. And let's get this started today.
Amazing. Michael, you've long warned about the risks, about centralization in digital systems. So I'd like to start by just asking you, where do you see trust breaking down most sharply today?
Oh, well, I think it really lies in the fact that so much of the underlying infrastructure of this, digital economy that we've now moved into, one that obviously has AI at its center, is so deeply concentrated in a number of companies, basically, a smattering of platforms that are really the heart of not only the underlying social media framework that was the era before we moved into this, but now, of course, the LLMs and these black box models. And so the idea that we are depending upon those companies and those platforms to process our data, to process our prompts, to get all of the answers to all the questions that have been explored through this sort of AI interface into these sort of black boxes. It's ultimately, the question is, where does trust break down? It's also, the other question is like the absolute, like, massive concentration of trust into an entity that doesn't have any transparency around it, right? So at the end of the day, um, I think trust breakdowns, if you look through history at them, right, they're actually a very interesting framework with which to look at, like, the histories of financial crises and social breakdowns, all these things. It's like they're always at its heart often a breakdown of trust between whoever was the holder of that trust and the people. So the idea now would be like, well, what's going to go wrong with that? And when it does, it will be massive, because there is just an enormous amount of trust being invested in these companies, which is why, what we're doing and all of us in this movement are trying desperately to sort of get to a much more decentralized framework so that we're not sitting in the middle of that vulnerability.
It sounds like it's a minefield.
It is, right? Look, the Defense Department is using, you know, these centralized, these LLMs. It's providing Defense Department data into, uh, you know, OpenAI and Grok. I'm not sure which ones they're actually using, but it's like, this is really a massive amount of just assumed trust that's happening on stuff that we would have assumed would be really very, very, very sensitive, right? Think of the protocols that protect that level of information, and now we're blindly throwing it all into these boxes. It is a huge risk. It really is.
And Thank you, Michael. And when we talk about the decentralization part, it's very important here. Of course, it's more secure, but also the question about privacy comes up, right? Overall in blockchain and so on, and specifically with your experience and long-term experience in media as well as in blockchain. My question is how has the narrative around privacy actually shifted over the years from your expertise, but also specifically, why does it matter in the AI/Web3 space at the moment?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's two ways to look at the question of privacy and trust. And so there's a big difference between kind of like the retail consumer experience with it and then the business one, right? And interestingly, they end up in like different trajectories. I think one of the biggest problems we faced through the Web 2 era was this mindset amongst the average person that it didn't really matter. I got nothing to hide, and therefore I'll just give it all up. And they would just blindly click on the TNC for all these things. And so we ended up, handing over massive amounts of our own private data. And the constant refrain you heard from people was like, I've got nothing to hide, and it's not a big deal. Or they would say, look, the horse has already left the stable. Nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to let it go, right? And I do think that is shifting. It's not as dramatic as we'd like it to be. There's still an enormous amount of blind trust being placed, but people now have a much deeper understanding about what they actually gave up, right? That it wasn't just, oh, whether or not I'm being my taxes are being surveilled, or my advertising or buying habits, but actually that this agency has been lost, right? We can go into that in a moment, but so I think there is a shift there. But remember, at exactly the same time, enterprises, some at certain levels, are going in and sort of doing the same thing, giving away a massive amount of valuable data to these platforms. But on the other hand, like, being bound in some respects by regulation, right? The failure to actually develop really effective medical record based research, right? We would have thought that this digital era, we should be able to do so much in terms of the advances of medicine, but the privacy concerns that are baked into medical information through HIPAA and all these other rules meant that enterprise data could never be released, because the mindset was, I can't trust them, we can do this, right? And we all know that there's now different ways this could be done. Confidential computing is a huge way to resolve that. But that was the other part of it. It was like an absolute, almost rock solid protection of data at the enterprise level, because of the fact that the only option was to give it to somebody else and not be able to control it. So I think you had these sort of conflicting trajectories, if you like. And what's I think really powerful right now is that all of that data that these LLMs have been trained on, that are now hallucinating and are now like, we're wondering about whether they're behaving well, as decent human proxies or not, right? Like, why are they racist? Why are they this? What, everything else? Like, well, it's come out of a algorithmically managed and kind of corporately structured Web 2 environment, in which all of our sort of non-privacy preserved information was just being thrown into this thing and manipulated by these algorithms and controlling our information. So of course, the worst of our behavior was emphasized, the polarizing stuff, and that's now being fed into the LLMs, right? So I think that that's the problem of it in terms of where the narrative has shifted. Look, as I said, as you mentioned at the beginning, Lisa, I wrote the book with Frank McCourt last year, Our Biggest Fight, which is all about how this is the most important thing for us to claw back, the giving up of our control in that social media environment. And I wish the book was bigger and better and doing more, but at the same time, it exists and it does have that conversation out there, because I think more and more people now understand, right? There's been a lot of movies made about it. There's been various, like, the conversation around the harm done by Facebook, right, is now a matter of public debate. And so people have a better understanding about what was lost and the dangers of it. I don't think they really fully understand, and I don't think they're really necessarily changing their behavior at all. But at least there's a conversation that's starting around that at that popular level. And then there's the enterprise level, which is they're still sitting on the data and getting worried and very nervous about whether or not they should enter into AI, and they still don't understand that there is another option, that there is this way to deal with it. So yeah, I hope that answers the question in some way. I think there's it's multifaceted is really the vision that I have of what's been going on.
important point you also mentioned. Sometimes people don't know about other options, right? And that's exactly why we are also here today to bring this awareness. Thank you for this breakdown. And to go a bit more deeper on this privacy question, with Advanced AI Society, a new big project that you can also talk about more if you like. You're advocating for decentralized AI. I mean, decentralized AI Web3 is the main part, a super powerful use case. And of course, Lisa and I, we are the experts on the TE part. So TEs are important for decentralized AI, but from your perspective, how do you see trusted execution environments or similar technologies, zero knowledge proof, fully homomorphic encryption, fit into making the vision of decentralized AI actually a reality? What kind of role does it play in advanced AI society as well?
Yeah, look, I sort of, as you know, I'm not an engineer. I just have a sort of picture of what I see the system, the governance of that system, and the economics of it playing out, right? And so, I think it's interesting to think about once we entered into the AI age, whether just what we mean by decentralization, if all it was everything needs to be on a blockchain, right, and everything should be subject to a smart contract, then is it decentralized when in fact that all that public data is out there, right? And so that it's like, even though on one level, like um, TEE or other forms of confidential compute, you could argue is the ultimate of centralization because it's bringing it right down to the individual owner of that data controlling it, right? There's only one. It's a little monopoly of one. But it turns out you need that if the entire system of all these monopolies of one can act in a decentralized way. Because otherwise, it's now just giving it all out there, and whatever the benefits of me being able to operate with autonomy and agency in that system have gone. Like, what's the point of having a fully decentralized system if its intent is to give agency to the individual or the company or whomever the actor is, and they lose it all because it's out there in the open, right? So it's like the building block is this privacy preserving kernel, and then from that position to then be able to sort of like open everything up, and so that we can verify what the models are doing, so that there is, all the other benefits of decentralization, this sort of, I think there's sort of the transfer of ownership to many rather than in centralization. There is the idea of decentralized compute itself being a more efficient or eventually, hopefully, more cost-effective way of running compute. All those things are made possible because of things like blockchains and decentralized architectures, but you need this underlying starting point of privacy. So that's why I'm, thrilled to have Secret as a member of the society, and why Fowler, at some point, I am sure Zoe is going to join. This isn't supposed to be a pitch, but I'm going to use it for that. We definitely need you guys in the tent, because I think, like, the architecture of the whole system, right? The society is necessarily representing different layers of the stack, right? We've got deep in providers of decentralized compute. We have folks who are building verifiable models. We have folks who are at the top end providing agents that are verifiably yours and are acting on your behalf as an app at that level. We've got people who are looking at the ID question, and so forth, right? And all of this sort of fits within what I would see as an ecosystem of decentralized AI. We need all the pieces, and we need the confidential compute piece to be part of that, so that it all comes together.
I love that. That's a very good, I'm going to borrow that. It's really good layman's explanation of the importance of TEs in decentralized AI. So really, really well said. And you're right, we do need all the pieces there. I really particularly enjoyed what you said about agency. And if we give people agency, that's great. But if the data is already out there and they cannot keep it private for themselves, what is the point of agency? And I wanted to mention that the Advanced AI Society is also working with the Manda Index on a Web3 quilt, which is really revolutionary in figuring out how blockchain. One of the things you mentioned, Michael, how can blockchain really improve the future of an index of agents or the internet of agents in the future? So another project that's really exciting going on. Let's shift the conversation now to talk about regulation, because we do build within a context, and that context is governed by lawmakers. So many people see regulation as either the savior or the threat. In this particular problem that we're solving, what's the nuanced truth about how those rules can shape innovation?
Yeah, like it's complex not just because of the narrative getting a little confused about this, but also because I think there are just different layers at which regulation should or shouldn't exist. And you know, foundational technologies like LLMs and others, um, I think if you regulate at that level, you create the worst set of circumstances because you're essentially giving regulatory capture to those entities. So, one of the big sort of discussion points that emerged, I think it was maybe 2 years ago now, you remember the pause letter that came out, right? And there was this advocacy amongst a lot of data scientists and AI experts, and certainly a lot of these companies that we should pause development of AI because it was going to take over the world. And there was this thinking then, there was like, Sam Altman from OpenAI had like hundreds of meetings with Congress people at the time, right? And they were saying, we want to be regulated. We need to be regulated. If we don't get regulated, we're all in trouble because the world's going to, blow up. The AI is going to take over us all. So regulate us, please. Trust us. But what that meant was our model becomes the officially blessed monopolies, right? And in a black box structure with no control over it, is the worst. That is the fastest route to totalitarianism right there, right? You've got a government-endorsed, centralized mechanism with private interests taking in all that data, right? So, regulation at that level to me is very, very dangerous, and it is something that needs to be addressed, um, very, very sensitively. But but we really do need to protect people at the user end, right? I think, like, there's theft going on. There are abuses. There are children being put at risk. There's absolutely every reason to put regulation there, right? The idea that we should be laissez-faire about whether or not a kid is being influenced by its AI companion and is, taking their own life as a result of that. No, 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 this is just it's innovation. It's like it's a cost of progress. No, that's not the way we've built our societies up until now, right? So that's at the user level. We need to protect consumers. We need to protect individuals from the harms that are done at that interface, and the companies need to be held accountable for that. Absolutely. It's just that nuance is what needs to be worked out here because either extreme, like laissez-faire, we don't care at all at the consumer end, or or heavily regulated at that institutional level, both lead to terrible, terrifying outcomes in my mind.
Yeah, and we have some experience with this. You have some experience with this because we've been in the crypto space for years, right? And crypto has a similar problem. It promises transparency and freedom, but it also enables bad behavior and bad actors. So it creates new risks. Do you think there are any lessons that we've learned in the crypto space over the past decade that we could carry forward into the AI debate usefully?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, like, if we look at, FTX, right? The Sam Bankman-Fried and that whole blow up. And the popular mindset around that was like, "Oh, you see, decentralized systems like crypto are so dangerous because people will do terrible things with them." When the reality was that FTX was a centralized system, and there was an enormous amount of trust, which translated into dollars and, assets invested in Sam Bankman-Fried's team, and we were vulnerable to that, right? And so the mindset should be, if there is a world in which, um, there is an entity that is controlling this and has that power, then we need to think hard about what the regulatory framework is at, because that's it. So maybe the solution, as I said, I don't think we should be regulating at the LL level. So if you establish that we have to trust Sam Altman the same way we have to trust Sam Bankman-Fried, two Sams, by the way, you may end up in this totalitarian problem I talked about because it's not facing at that consumer end. But at the same time, maybe the mandate from a a political perspective is actually to force decentralization at that level, right? That we in fact things like the 1996 Telecom Act, which was a very important like enforcement of demonopolization of the telecoms industry and led the way to the internet, should be applied at this foundational utility level because of the fact that there's a centralizing risk associated with it, right? But then if you go out at the consumer level, where you find centralizers like Sam Bankman-Fried, that's the judgment by which you go, I'm sorry, we need to regulate you there because you're interfacing with the consumer at that point, and that contract needs to be regulated around behaviors and harms and everything else, right? So I'm not a technology expert, I'm not an engineer, I'm none of these things, I'm not a policy expert, but I do think that we need to think hard about where the harms to society are and where the biggest risks of what they can be. Is it from monopolized control of data, which means there's a certain like mindset there, or is it the individual harms that happen at that literally at that transactional level? And those two things I think can be thought of in that dichotomy in some way.
Okay. And to go, not to pinpoint too much on TEs, but of course, this is also one of the focus areas here. Um, to go more into the question of the protecting human dignity, right? You touched on this already, super important point, and how we can optimize the AI or the AI black box here. Maybe from your perspective, because you do promote decentralized AI with advanced AI society, what could be done more, or what can teams, what can we do actually to use more verifiable technologies like TE, CK, and so on to actually protect human dignity more? Not only to design the infrastructure, what else can be done in your eyes?
Well, I mean, I think a part of this is the exercise of these sorts of podcasts where there has to be an education out there to the average user. I think there's a lot of I think the incumbency is on the developers of these things to figure out how to convince the mainstream of value, right? That I think is the most important thing that we can do right now. And the society sees that as one of our roles, by the way. We see education and workshops and things like that that we need to build with these enterprises as a part of that process. But I think if you go back to where your question is like, what are the teams who are developing that we can do? Then I think building products that are going to be easily translatable and easily accessible, easily usable, is paramount, right? Now, often there's a trade-off, right? One of the reasons why we end up in these centralized environments because decentralization is hard, it's costly, it's cumbersome, it's all those things. So we ended up defaulting to an imperfect system. It's a different question, I think, in confidential compute, but there are similar issues, right? The cost, the challenges of doing that. So, where is like the sweetest point where you can make this thing as accessible as possible, as turnkey as possible, but at the same time make sure that it's carrying all of the power that comes with that confidentiality into the relationship with the player. So it's a UX UI thing without giving up the security. Those are inherent challenges, but that's that finding that balance is, I think, one of the most important challenges that you all face.
And just to add to this, also regarding the human dignity, I think what we also try to do at Fala, and I think Secret is also very strong about, is to implement this privacy in the existing tools, right? You can actually use TEs based on the Fala cloud in ChatGPT already, like using the existing AI tools that we have, just upgrading it with the privacy part. I think that's a very good move forward, so the users don't have to get into specifically much new tools, but we of course work on the infrastructure, or we add the privacy to the existing, the strong or the most, yeah, the strongest AI or tools that are out there, right?
Yeah, I don't want to sit here advocating for which confidential compute model is the best, but I you know, I really enjoyed a debate that I moderated between Ilya Polosukhin from Near and Sri Rankanan, the founder of Eigenlayer, at the Permissionless conference recently. Near has embraced TEE in its vision for how it bakes confidential computing into its AI-ready solutions, whereas Eigenlayer is looking at a much more decentralized, watchtower-based idea that you've got these sort of protectors of the thing, and there's like crawls out to almost like a DAO-like structure that will call out the the abuses of privacy that emerge in that, right? And so it's leaning much more into decentralization at the network layer, whereas the TE models is it's like, okay, no, we're gonna look at the device, and once we get that fixed, and I think like there's a trade off. There's always a trade off because one could argue that, as you guys will well know, that one of the critiques of the TE thing is that you still have to trust. You do have to trust somewhere later the hardware makers, and I think the technology is getting better and better around that. But you can still argue that at some point there's some, has somebody put a backdoor in there or not, right? Uh, and then at the other layer is like, well, is this network actually, is it efficient? Can it actually really be trusted on that level? Because it's like going to have so many coordination governance problems. And I just think that decentralization is so messy. It's an important aspect of everything that we're doing. It's why we are vouching for it. But the degree to which we can find solutions that really minimally impact the risk, but make it more efficient, I think are compelling. Like, I'm not a purist of these things, right? So I think that's really the interesting thing about TEE. It gives this opportunity to say, let's just start with this layer. If we can all trust at that layer, then everything else built on top of it becomes possible, and possible in a way, Zoe, that is not so interruptive of the existing behaviors. I can still keep using ChatGPT, um, and so forth, right? And so, it's a very interesting way to think about how you scale, essentially.
Right. So, Zoe, I'm going to put you on the spot now and ask you a question. Looking ahead, I think we've really covered the essence of what TEEs bring, what the value that they bring to this future of decentralized AI and advanced AI. And what I'd like to do now is just focus on looking ahead. What is your biggest hope and your biggest fear for how humans and machines share agency in the digital age?
Yeah, amazing question. I think it's actually my hope and my fear is the same, I would say, because my fear is that people are not engaging enough with the AI or with the machine, are not trusting it enough because they are fearful. And the opposite of this, of course, the hope is that people do understand how much, or to actually eliminate the fear that they have and actually trust because we have technology that's privacy preserving, right? So you create an openness that you can trust these machines and you can trust AI, and through this you engage with it much more. We use AI tools on a daily basis already, right? Why are we not expanding this in use cases in Web3, in trading, in governance processes, and so on? And we are a bit, I think, hesitant at the moment. We're using ChatGPT on a daily basis, but don't integrating AI in other use cases because there is a risk, a personal hesitancy, because of the privacy, because of the data that we are sharing. So I think if we build this infrastructure that we are pioneers in, right, whatever privacy preserving technology we are laying there, this can be also solved. So again, my hope is that people see we have trustful technology and engaging with the agents and with the AI as much as possible.
Amazing. Yeah, I know you spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I wanted to hear what your thoughts were on that. But Michael, I'm going to pass the same question over to you, and you've had a little time to think about it. So I'm wondering, what is your biggest hope and your biggest fear of how humans and machines work together in the digital age?
Okay. So on the positive side, my biggest hope is that if we can establish both the privacy frameworks and contours around which this can operate, and by extension, we can truly give people agency, so that there is a root basis of human authority in what the agents are doing, then we can unlock all the data that we've accumulated, the good data, not the sloppy stuff that social media drove us into, but the really valuable stuff that we've got sitting in enterprises and research institutes and everything else, to really bring the power of this technology to unlock the solutions to so many of the world's problems, right? I think that we'd love to fix climate change. We'd love to address starvation. We'd love to address disease. Like, these are things that we can do because this technology isn't truly powerful. But to do so, we have to unlock the data. To do so, we have to have the confidence that what we want those machines to doing is doing, right? So then my fear, of course, is the flip side of that, which is that we assume that we fixed it, and that it's all safe. Or even worse in some respects is that mechanism of capitalistic competition, which is a good thing if done right, but a bad thing if if it's forcing people too quickly into making bad decisions. That there's like, you know what? I'm not sure that I can trust ChatGPT or whatever, but my competitor's doing it and look how much they're growing. So I'm going to go in there as well. Right. And then all of society just like feels compelled by all of this competitive pressure to dive deeply into this. And I do think we're already seeing a lot of this, right? Whether it is in the actions of people who are using these tools or it is actually in the decisions that investors are making, right? It's the FOMO almost. I think like FOMO is actually a very dangerous thing in this environment. So,
It is. Yes.
that's
Well
gonna
said. So, well, looks like we're looking at potentially huge beneficial changes with, a bit of a cliff that we could fall off. So let's try to stay at the top of the cliff,
let's not fall
not
off
go
the
over
cliff.
the edge.
It's a good place to end it. Yes.
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. Thank you, Zoe, for co-hosting. This has been Spelling the Tea, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.